and I'll take the ball from Bernard and also get into a few additions regarding cocktail effects, mixtures of substances. But I'll also start with Madam Nowak on her intervention, then go to a number of the more scientific, technical, including mixtures, and then finish off with financing, fees, resources, etc. Start out with, yes, just to reinforce, we indeed, as agency, all my colleagues here it's in our mandate, it's being a public agency. We, of course, are there to serve you, and we're eager to do so. And in particular, if you have or are discussing legislative proposals, which includes modifying, changing, or adding tasks which involve us agencies, then being involved early, not in the policy discussions, but on what this means in terms of resources, timing, possibility, feasibility, we would be very eager and happy to join. On the more content issues, I can start with public consultation, where indeed this is a big challenge. It's in particular a big challenge in relationship to harvesting comments, ideas, and information from the citizen and having that in a multiplicity of languages and still having a very efficient system. And there the European Ombudsman has just come up with a 10-point agenda for the agencies to follow on how best to implement that. And I can say that we will learn by applying the Ombudsman's recommendations in order to increase the accessibility to our public consultations and contribution of information from around Europe. On substitution, yes, my presentation I tried to stay to 5 minutes. I went to 8. I could easily have spent 3 hours. And substitution is, of course, one of the main drivers of both safety and innovation. Substitution needs predictability and it needs knowledge. And if we have predictability and knowledge, substitution can be driven. But fully agree that substitution is a very important machinery within the chemicals legislation to promote innovation and thereby also promote safety. Speeding up the identification of endocrine disruptors and banning them. The banning bit, that's your ballpark, that of the Commission, that of Council, not mine. Speeding up identifying endocrine disruptors, I can see at least 3 angles which would help us in ECHA. One is to create consistency and linkages between legislation. I don't need it between the legislation we implement in ECHA, nor with EFSA, because we have a very close collaboration there, but it would expedite our work if there would be better linkages and consistency between us and all the other pieces of legislation. Effectively, you identify a substance as an endocrine disruptor in one place, it's an endocrine disruptor everywhere. That would be very helpful and useful. Another thing is grouping. This is how we've rearranged, as I mentioned, our agency, that we will look at grouping as basically everyday work. We will not look at an individual chemical. And clearly there's a correlation between how a chemical is structured and thereby chemicals in a group and the effects that they have and the intentional uses that such chemicals have. So that is an area we're looking into, we're investing, and we definitely see as a significant potential in terms of speeding up the identification of endocrine disruptors. Finally, it's testing. If you look at the amount of information we have and the amount of chemicals for which we need information, it's evident that we do need more testing. And for identifying endocrine disruptors, it requires more testing on animals. But of course, we should only test where necessary to get this information basis. But that is an activity that we're taking very serious and one that we have accelerated significantly in the compliance check, but also the substance evaluation parts of REACH in order to do the necessary testing to identify as many substances as possible as endocrine disruptors or conclude that they're not endocrine disruptors, which is even more important, because then we know that that's a substance that does not have that effect. Cocktail effects, to add on to what Bernhard said, there are effectively two generic types of cocktail effects. There's the unintentional cocktail that we get exposed to, and then there's the intentional cocktail that we get exposed to. And I believe that you were hinting or meaning the unintentional. The chemicals legislation has a pretty strong framework for ensuring that the risks from the intentional cocktails that we call mixtures are properly controlled. There's still a lot of work to do because it requires smooth and efficient interfaces between, for example, REACH, classification and labeling, and the occupational safety and health legislation, which by no means is there yet, but the system is there and we have something to work on. In terms of unintentional mixtures, following what Bernhard said, the main thing is to know what are they? Which unintentional mixtures are we exposed to? And I think the big contributor to helping that knowledge is a much more systematic collection of existing data, but also steering of new monitoring data collection, both as human biomonitoring, but also monitoring in the environment and in wildlife species. That would be a significant contribution. But clearly, absolutely no problem. But clearly, the work on grouping is also something that's going to help. We have done, like our colleagues in EFSA, some mixture, unintentional mixture or unintentional cocktail exposure work on, for example, phthalates. So the methodology is being developed, and if it's needed, we can pragmatically implement it. The legal frameworks within some of the chemicals legislation can enable us to do something, but it is the information base, as Bernhard also was hinting towards or explaining, that is better needed. Finally, let me get to fees and resources. Again, fees, that's not our business. Whether we should be fully fee financed or not, that's a policy decision, because obviously it's an issue of weighing how do you want to implement the polluter pays principle versus the burden that fee puts on industry. So that's out of our realm. That's a policy choice. We do struggle with having fee income because of the unpredictability of it, but that's a technical matter in a budgetary context that I'd happily explain, but maybe not for now. But we're having quite some problems with that. We do not feel in any way that we are in the pocket of industry because they pay us fees. So therefore, we see it from our perspective as a choice for policy to decide how fees should be paid or not to ECHA. On the budgetary side, the coin is, what do you want us to do? And I'll tell you what we can do. So if my presumption is that you want us to fully implement the actions in the REACH review, accelerating compliance check to be finished by 2027, to accelerate our work on authorization, to accelerate our work on restrictions, to accelerate our work on biocides, to accelerate our work on grouping, which are the political messages we're getting, then we need stable resources. I can accelerate with stable resources and predictable resources. Now, the status of the famous FISH 32, which was indicative budget values for the various agencies, does not give us that basis. But clearly, the Commission made that proposal before the new political priorities. But if we take the Commission's proposal to financing agencies, and including my agency, then that does not give us a stable framework to implement the priorities that you see, for example, in the Commission's fitness check on the REACH review, nor does it provide us the basis to contribute actively to any adjustments that would come from the fitness check of all chemicals legislation except REACH. So my plea is to do the things that are on the table now. We need stable resources, simply a continuation what we have now, evidently inflation adjusted. And if you want us to do more things, then we would want and need additional resources on top of that. Thank you very much.